Hello everyone, and thanks for joining us live on Facebook this evening. Tonight we are coming from the Adnams Tour Centre here in Southwold, which is very exciting. I can see more and more people are joining us as we say hello. So tonight, yes, live from Southwold, we're here with Head of Operations, Fergus Fitzgerald, who's going to be helping us tonight taste some beers. Thank you very much everyone for joining us. So we've got six
beers, yes.
6 beers that we're going to be trying tonight. How do you want to begin?
So normally when we're tasting beer, we sort of try and go up in sort of strength of flavour. So usually that goes with alcohol levels, but not always. So what we try to do is arrange them in strength of flavour as they go up. And then we've also got some lovely snacks that your team have put together.
Yeah, we have. So they're quite eclectic.
Yes,
some of the snacks we've got, and we're going on quite the taste journey, aren't we? Yes. So yeah, we're in for a bit of a treat tonight. I think some people may, I think the team have shared with you already some of the beers that we're going to be tasting tonight. So some of you might be joining us and drinking along at home. I hope you are. It's a very tough job I have here at the co-op. Let's crack on,
Should we crack in? Okay.
Yeah.
So we're going to first do Earl Grey IPA, Earl Grey Lager.
Yeah.
So it's a lager we started producing, I guess, about 5 years ago.
Okay.
It was sort of inspired by a collaboration brew we did with a brewery called Yeasty Boys, and they did this sort of Earl Grey IPA. And it was the first time we'd used Earl Grey in a beer, but it sort of really opened our eyes to because it sounds really weird.
Yeah.
Earl Grey in a beer sounds strange.
But it's a citrusy flavour, though,
Exactly,
isn't it? It's that bergamot.
Yeah, exactly. When you start matching some of the flavours we get from hops, actually, the tea is doing the same job. So some of the tannin you get from the tea is doing the job of the bitterness. Some of those lemony notes are doing some of the job. So actually, it makes a lot of sense when you break it down. Okay. So let's taste it.
Yeah, let's. That's very good. That's a nice sound.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Oh, lovely colour.
So it is a lager. So we brew it as a normal lager. So it's got lager malt in it, which really the lager malt tends to be quite pale. We ferment it with a lager yeast, which tends to it lets the sort of hops and malt shine through much more. And then during the process, we add Earl Grey twice during the process. So we add it at the hot end when we're basically boiling the wort, and then we add it again when it's finished from fermentation. And unsurprisingly, what you should get is some Earl Grey on the aroma.
Yeah.
So it should be quite crisp, quite clean, but with that nice tanniny Earl Grey sort of running through it.
Yeah, you really do, don't you? Wow, that's made. And is it? Forgive my ignorance. I'm a drinker, not a brewer like you.
That's all right.
But what is the difference between the way that you said that you're brewing it like a lager? What's the difference between the lager and the bitter?
For lager, it tends to be cold fermentation. So we have a house yeast at Adnams that we've used since sort of 1920, and it gives us sort of a house character. So we do lots of beers with our yeast, and you can sort of see the sort of flavour thread running through them. Tends to like to be fermented warm, so something like 17, 18 degrees Celsius up to sort of 23. For the lager, it wouldn't like being fermented cold. So we use a separate yeast for this, and we ferment about 13 degrees. There's no straightforward definition, but the basic definition, I guess, is that with lager, you're not looking for too much influence from the yeast. We don't want the yeast to make much flavour. We want to do the fermentation, but let the hops and the malt shine through. Whereas with ale, for our own, we do want much more influence from the yeast. So we want it to make more flavour. That's basically what the difference is.
And I love the idea that you've had a yeast since 1920. It sort of sounds like you're keeping it in a kind of cupboard somewhere.
It's part of the family. So Adnams is 150 years old this year, so I should probably say that. But in sort of 1920s or so, we used to go up to a brewery in Norwich called Morgan's Brewery, get some of their yeast, and that's what we used. And so that was a weekly job. Someone went up and got that yeast. In sort of the Second World War, Morgan's then got bombed in the Second World War and didn't recover from that. So then we had to become self-sufficient, which is not a terrible thing for a brewery to be.
No.
And actually, thankfully, when you put yeast into the wort, sort of the sweet liquid you get from the barley, when you put it in there, actually it grows into more yeast. So usually we get 3 to 4 times as much yeast out as we put in. And that extra yeast, during a bit of the process, it likes to sort of separate itself out from the beer, which is very helpful.
Move out of home.
And then we take it out, and then we store it, and then we use it for the next batch. And then every 6 months or so, we go back to the original strains of yeast, which we hold in a sort of liquid nitrogen lab in sort of Norwich, and also down in Kent. And then sort of grow it back up from scratch again. Because when yeast
so you
grows,
sort of reset.
we reset it, yeah. Because when yeast grows, every now and again it mutates a little bit. So to get rid of those mutations and try and stay as true to the original yeast as possible, we go back to the original.
Amazing. Wow.
Yes. So
I didn't know.
food.
So we're going for a Scotch egg.
Yeah,
which
that's right.
was one of our sort of slightly less expected sort of forays into the flavours. So we're going to. And what did we retrofit? What did we retrofit with?
What did we say was the reason afterwards? So we decided it was sort of like a egg sandwich with a cup of Earl Grey tea, except the egg sandwich is in a Scotch egg and the Earl Grey is in
it's a grown-up version. That's nice.
Yeah, I think they work okay.
Yeah.
I think the sort of lemoniness of the beer does cut through a little bit of the
sort of richness and the fat in the Scotch egg. So that's very
nice.
So
more of a contrast, but I think that works okay.
That's lovely. So that was Earl Grey.
Yep.
And I think the majority, that's relatively, is that quite a new beer? Or is
it's about 3 or 4 years old, but tends to be mostly through our own shops, our own retail. So relatively, because it's slightly weird.
Yeah, a bit more exclusive in terms of where you can get it from.
That's right.
So that one's not available in the Eastern England Cup.
That's right.
Some of the ones we're going to be trying
I think everything else we're going to talk about is available.
Okay, so now we're going to move on to Ghost Ship now,
aren't we? We're going to do Ghost Ship. So Ghost Ship is our best-selling beer. It's now 12 years old. So sort of started off as a seasonal beer in 2010. It was our biggest selling season at the time. We brought it back the following year. Ran out before Halloween, which was not the most popular thing in the world. And then the following year, we thought, actually, this is going so well, we need to make it a permanent beer. So since then, it's been in constant growth, and it is now our best seller. And we've even made a 0.5% version.
I was going to say, because that has made, when I've been the nominated driver at various parties, that's made my evenings more bearable.
Good.
And I know other people who I have been designated drivers with have enjoyed that alcohol-free.
We are very proud of the 0.5 Ghost Ship. I think it does taste like a beer, which is the whole point of it.
Yeah.
So the recipe for Ghost Ship involves a hop called Citra. So Citra is an American hop which came out in sort of 2009 or so. But we had a sort of a visit from a hop merchant in Walberswick, just across the sort of river from here, and he was talking about this amazing new hop that they'd just come out in America. It was so unlike anything else that was around at the time, and it is how, when we talk about hops now, there's lots of hops that have lots of fruit, sort of, mango and passion fruit and lime and lemon, all those flavors really coming through. But actually back in 2009, they were very rare. So Citra was completely new.
A really groundbreaking kind of flavor profile.
And so we decided the next chance we had, we would use Citra in the beer, and the next chance we had was Ghost Ship.
And it's amazing, isn't it? I know that it's this is an ale and that's a lager, but the colours, that's what's so lovely, isn't it? Yeah,
so we use a little bit of rye in here as well. So Jonathan Adnams actually grows some rye just in Raiden, which is the next village in sort of after Southwold, and Raiden actually means rye on the hill. So historically there was a lot of rye. Well, we think so. Historically,
it makes sense.
We've put two and two together. So hopefully that is four. But, so use a little bit of rye, which gives it that little bit of colour and a little bit of spiciness to the beer as well. But mainly what we're looking for is that sort of lemon lime coming through from the Citra hop.
Yeah. It's very easy to drink, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, that's the idea. Yes.
I know, but it is so the 0.5 is so like the big boy beer, as it were. It's really quite.
Yes. Jonathan calls it full fat version, but yes.
Yeah. Well, that's a good way to because you get full fat Coke, don't you? That's
the one. So we spent a lot of time researching how we would make a non-alcoholic version of Ghost Ship. So we looked at lots of technologies, lots of ways of doing it, and we found one that was sort of going to preserve, because it's really the hop character that needs to be pulled through, and the system we put in is something called reverse osmosis, which in very simple terms is a filtration system where you push a fermented beer, and that was probably the key. The beer had to be fully fermented because lots of the flavors in beer are coming from fermentation. And it's a word that I think not everyone wants to talk about fermentation. It sort of sounds a bit weird, but actually it's key. It's key for driving the flavour. So to make the flavour of Ghost Ship, you need to ferment it, and then you need to take the alcohol out. And so this system called reverse osmosis allows us to filter the water and alcohol out, leaving the flavour behind.
And is that why it's not 0% then? Is that because there's always a sort
There's always a bit there. We could push it further, but actually what it does is it drives up the water usage on that process, and really it starts to degrade the flavour a little bit more. So we sort of got to 0.5 and thought that's the perfect place for that beer.
And it makes it a beer that is safe to.
Yeah, so I think the most common thing I think is people say if you're having a banana milkshake and you're using some bananas that are brown, essentially that's banana milkshake has already got sort of 0.5% alcohol-ish in it. So
amazing.
It is very low. It is in most countries that would be called alcohol-free.
Yes.
So it is. It is
we're
very
being
low.
so straight up. So this one we're going to pair with some munchy seeds.
Yes.
I think.
Yes.
And we're going to. So these are munchy seeds. So these you can get in that. You can get your both at the co-op.
You can buy these.
Both of them at the co-op here. So do you want to try some of your?
I
don't know how much.
That's probably enough.
Yes.
Yeah. That's probably
we've got to chew.
So these are some spicy seeds.
We've sat here snacking as well, waiting. So I'm sort of.
So I think these have got a little bit of kick to them, haven't they?
They have. They're mild chili, I think. So.
So I think the theory with this is that that sort of that lemony lime will help
and
sort of balance out.
And that tastiness as well, isn't there? There's that kind of
and as well as the colour, we also get a bit of nutty spiciness coming from the rye. So I think that there is a bit more sort of complementary flavours going on here than maybe the first match was more contrast.
Yes, yeah. It gets weirder, some of the pairings we've got. So. Right, so now the next one we're going to try. Have we got any questions? Oh, here we go. I've been forgetting about the questions. I've been so carried away with the beer and the snack. So how long does it take to produce a beer from concept to appearing on a supermarket shelf?
So in pure production, so if you want to get a beer right through, it takes about a month. But obviously, if it's a completely new recipe, we need to get a few shots at it sometimes. It does depend what we're doing. If it's new hops, new malts, new yeasts, things we haven't used before, then we'll probably need a couple of chances to sort of phone, just get the recipe tightened in a little bit.
Yeah.
But usually, if it's materials we're familiar with, then actually it can be quite quick. But to get it. Actually, I would say most of the time takes in designing that label. That's where all the time goes.
Well, I suppose that's the curb appeal, isn't it? The shelf
exactly,
appeal.
Yeah. Unless that label is right, then people will just walk by it. And I think the beer world is very, very congested now. There's so many brands, so many great beers out there that actually you need to draw people's attention. And so it does actually genuinely take time. I might give the marketing team a bit of hard time sometimes, but it genuinely does take time to get that right.
Yeah, and I suppose they're doing it for the right reasons,
absolutely,
even if you're keen to get the beer right. So I like this. Richard Hill tells us that Ghost Ship got him into drinking real ale, which is fantastic.
Good.
Which is good news. What's your favourite beer?
So I have a very boring answer. I love them all equally.
Of course. Of course.
But I think one of the things I love about beer is there's so much variety.
Yeah.
You can go from very simple ingredients, so water, malted barley, hops, yeast, very simple. You can go, and then you can add lots of spicing, lots of fruit. You can do very, very sort of broad breadth of flavours.
Yeah.
So genuinely, I do like trying new beers. I do like trying new styles of beer.
Yeah.
So what might be my favourite today at this moment in time might not be tomorrow morning. Well, maybe not morning, because we don't drink much beer in the morning. Apart from tasting at work, which is 9:30 in the morning if you're still around. Yeah. But most of the time, I just like the variety of beer.
Yeah. Okay, that's fair enough. So no favourites.
No favourites, no.
You've got no perennials that you always go back to?
There's some staples. So some of the staples are in front of us here.
Yeah.
Some more elsewhere.
Yeah.
But
Yes. Good. Okay, so now we're going to try Broadside.
So we're going to try Broadside. So Bottle Broadside is 50 years old this year.
Wow.
So we've got a few anniversaries knocking around this year. So Bottle Broadside.
Keep the marketing team busy.
So first brewed in 1972, and it was brewed for the tricentenary of the Battle of Solbay, which I'm sure you'll remember that. Well, not remember it, but so 300 years after the Battle of Solbay, they decided to brew this beer. Jonathan Adnams, they originally brewed it as a cask beer, and it's 6.3%. In bottle, and the original cask beer was 6.3, but that didn't last very long because it was a bit strong for a draft beer. So they put it into bottle very quickly after that.
Yeah.
We do a draft version now, which came around the 1980s, sort of mid 80s, which is 4.7. So if you are a fan of Broadside, just be aware there are two versions. There is the bottle version and there is the cask version, and you can definitely drink more of the cask version than the bottle.
There's more falling down water.
There is more falling down. Yes. So this is one of the beers I think that showcases the Adnams yeast really, really well.
Oh, okay.
It's sort of so it has a lot of malt character, and we use something called chocolate malt in here. which doesn't taste of chocolate, but tastes more like coffee. So it's really how you roast it.
So it's on that sort of hickory kind of, those sort of
exactly.
notes,
And it's that roasting process that gives it that sort of coffee flavour and colour. So one of the reasons people use it, and in stouts as well, is to give that colour to the beer. But what it also adds is that coffee. And then we ferment it with our house yeast, as we do with most beer.
Thank you.
And we ferment it a bit warmer, so we ferment this about 23 degrees Celsius. Okay. And what that does is it encourages our yeast to make what we call esters, so those sort of fruitier flavours, so things like cherry and strawberry, those sorts of flavours. Usually helps if I say what's going to be in there, and then you taste it.
I know, and I was having a flashback to A-level chemistry when you were talking about
yes, esters, yes.
So, yes. That was a long time ago. Not quite as long as the beer is, but...
so this is, I think this is one of our really iconic beers. So you do get that sort of cherry and that sort of dried fruit coming through as well.
It is completely different, isn't it? And just the difference in colour as well. You can really see how those have really made those. It's beautiful, isn't it? It's like going to a honey stall at a village.
Yes, and you see all the range of colours, and that really comes from the maltster. So we've got some really great relationships with the sort of the maltsters locally. So we buy barley that's been grown and malted locally, which would be slightly crazy not to. Where we are situated, we're surrounded by some of the best malting quality barley in the world. So we've got long-term relationship with them, and the maltsters then make some great malted barley from them. Going through from pale ale malt, which is really light, through to things like chocolate and crystal, which all have different sorts of flavours, which are one of the tools we use to make different beers.
This is really delicious. I think this is my favourite so far, and I really like the Earl Grey one. So. I like a stout and a porter as well, you see. So
a lot more sweetness left in this beer as well. So you do need a bit more sweetness, I think, for higher strength beers. It helps balance out the alcohol a little bit. But I think that sweetness also gives a bit more of a velvety finish to it. I think it gives a bit more mouthfeel to the beer.
It's beautiful. Wonderful. Right. So, and what we're pairing this with? We've got cheese with this one.
Yes, cheese with this one.
There we're going to go.
So, Broadside, in my opinion, is one of the best matches for cheese. Doesn't really even matter what the cheese is. Any cheese. It's one of the best matches for cheese. And this, I guess, this is more of a contrasting flavour, I think, this time again, where the sort of the bitterness of the beer is helping cut through the sort of fattiness of the cheese.
That was very nice. That's really good.
And the cheese is almost cleansing your palate, ready for the next beer. It's usually the other way around.
That's really good. Ooh, that's a really nice. Now the nights are drawing in.
Yeah.
Sunday evening, if you've got the fire going.
I think any Sunday evening,
Broadside,
whatever day during the year is fine.
But like just now, because it was pouring with rain when I came here earlier on this evening, and just the idea of going home to a fire and a nice bit of cheese, and that sounds like a afternoon or evening well spent.
Genuinely is a great match.
That's really delicious. So, right, we're now on to our fourth.
Yes, we're going to
fourth beer. And this is Ease Up.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about Ease Up next. So Ease Up is what we'd call what used to call a session IPA, which then means I have to tell you what an IPA is. Which is the problem. So IPAs historically were beers that were more heavily hopped. They sort of got associated with being exported to India, partly on the basis that they sort of thought that sort of hops helped preserve the beer for longer. There was a lot of beer essentially that was IPA that was also being sold in England, but it got this sort of term IPA. That then sort of in the UK typically meant it was slightly higher in alcohol, so 5% plus. But then sort of after both World Wars, and because of the sort of need to keep grain for food, the alcohol sort of strengths of beer started to come down. And after the Second World War, they stayed down. So you ended up with IPA beers that historically would have been 5 plus, were now sort of 3.4 or 3.5. And along with that, they also started taking some of the hop character away. But then the American sort of craft brewing industry in the sort of 80s and 1980s sort of looked back into what English brewers used to do, and those historic IPAs, and they sort of reinvented them. This time they reinvented them with American hops, which tended to be more citrus and more grapefruit sort of flavours. So they then started making these sort of higher strength, sort of 6% sort of IPAs again. And then that trend then got exported back to us again. So So we started making those IPAs as well, and some English IPAs, but also lots of American type IPAs. But one of the problems with those 6% beers is you can't drink a lot of them.
No,
So they started making session IPAs, which were sort of under 5%. And that's where the name Ease Up and Session IPA comes from.
I see. Oh, that's good. And this is one, I think, the most eclectic thing we're going to be sampling this evening. So I think we were hoping for some rhubarb and custard lollies, weren't we?
That was our head brewer, Dan Gooderham, who's our head brewer, suggested that would be a really good match.
Yeah, and it would go beautifully with the label as well, wouldn't it?
Yes, it would go very well with that, yes.
Colour coordination. So what we found from one of our locally sourced producers, so this is Retro Popcorn, and we're doing rhubarb and custard popcorn with our Ease Up. Is this Ease Up though? So this is kind of in the middle, isn't it, between the Broadside and
a little bit darker than Ghost Ship, but only a slight bit. So it uses some oats in here as well, but lots of American hops as well. We sort of made a decision a few years ago. Everything has some English hops in it because we want to try and make sure we support the English hop industry.
Of course.
But actually, we talk about hops in the same way people talk about grape varieties. It's not just about the variety; it's also where it's grown. So if you want lots of big citrus sort of flavors, typically you go to America or Australia for those varieties.
And is that the climate? Is it the soil?
It's climate. It's a lot of it's to do with hours of sunshine and warmth basically. It's a little bit warmer on the west coast of the US.
Maybe not this summer, but it's a slightly novel.
But there is a lot of work in the UK sort of hop industry about trying to bring new varieties through, which we're going to taste at the very end actually, which are trying to get some more citrus flavors coming through. But this is mostly American. So you should find it's got a slightly floral note even. A bit of rose sort of on the nose. So there's a bit of Cascade in here, which is sort of delivering that. And there's also some Chinook as well. And there's a little bit of a hop called Sriracha, which adds a little bit of coriander sort of note to it.
And you can, it feels like it's sort of family of Ghost Ship as well, in that kind of.
Yeah, and I think that is partly the citrus, but I think also partly the sort of influence of the yeast, which tends to produce small amounts of flavour, but they tend to sort of tie things together. Yeah,
it's that's very nice. So are we going to brave the popcorn?
Oh yes, definitely.
We've got to. So we've decanted some into a bowl. There you go. You're going to.
So this is rhubarb and custard popcorn.
Popcorn. I'm going to go for something that looks extra pink, so it's definitely rhubarby.
Yes.
That was very rhubarby, that bit.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's give it a go.
I think you can still describe it as eclectic, I think.
Yeah.
As a match.
It was very inventive.
Yeah.
The guys who were tasked with coming up with some rhubarby things. So, so we've got some more questions here as well, haven't we? So, David Wedgwood, I like a nice bag of Just Crisps jalapeno.
Yeah, good.
There we go, a bit of a kick there.
Yeah.
And Deborah Sachs, are there different hops used in Broadside?
So typically we use First Gold or Endeavour, and a combination of Endeavour, which are both UK hops. So all the hops in Broadside and Southwold Bitter are still English. So we get a little bit of a sort of orange peel sort of rind from the First Gold hops, which we think works really well with that sort of that flavour profile. But they are a little bit in the background. It is really about the yeast and the malt coming through on it.
Okay. Brilliant. Right, so we're cantering to the end now, aren't we? So now we're going to go to Southwold. And is this the oldest?
It's the oldest beer on this table.
On the table,
So we do have an older beer in our sort of repertoire. So we do a beer called Tally Ho, which is a beer that we've been brewing at least since 1880, maybe a bit before. There's a bit of greyness before that, but at least since 1880. And back in 1880, it would have been a sort of normal everyday beer. It's 7.2% though, so everyday beer back then is very different to everyday beer here. Or maybe it isn't, I don't know.
Fewer cars.
Yes, that's true. So it's now turned into a sort of once a year beer, so we do it sort of usually around sort of October, November time. So we've actually just brewed this year's batch this week. So it'll be put into cask and bottled sort of for December.
And you say it's a vintage year, don't you? So you get the year of the...
So we put the year... Now, as we only brew it once a year, we thought it'd be nice to actually say what year when you get it.
So a good Christmas present idea for people, I think. So, and this we're going to pair with, So
Southwold Bitter is the next oldest, I think that is in sort of in terms of our permanent range. So Southwold Bitter was sort of brought out in the 1960s. It's gone through various names in its time. I think it was called Best Bitter. It was then called The Bitter for a bit, very short-lived episode, and now it's called Southwold Bitter.
Brilliant.
So
we're going to be pairing this with Suffolk salami with
Yes.
rosemary, and that's from the Suffolk Salami Company. So that's a Suffolk pork
yes.
with a Southwold bitter, which
So Southwold
feels-
Bitter's got a little bit of crystal malt in there, which adds a little bit of toffiness to the beer.
Yeah.
And then it uses English hops. It uses a lot of a hop called Fuggles.
oh wowzers! Yeah.
Fuggles is actually, I think, having an anniversary this year as well. So Fuggles is
it really is an anniversary
lots of
year,
anniversaries.
isn't it?
It's not our anniversary, but
No,
Fuggles
no,
as a
no.
hop has got its anniversary
Yeah.
as well this year. So Fuggles is one of the classic English hops. Has lots of herbal characteristics to it, a little bit of mint, a little bit of sort of thyme as well, but very typically English in terms of that herbal note.
It has got a sort of. It is a sort of veggier smell.
Veggier.
Veggier.
No, we don't use that
Tell I
term.
don't do this
We
job.
don't
can't
use
you?
that term.
No, but whereas the others are more sort of citrusy and
Yeah,
fruits.
yeah,
and
this is-
it
yeah.
feels more savoury.
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
savoury.
Savoury maybe better than veggier.
Savoury's okay. We'll go with savoury. But yeah, it's more of a beer for contemplation, I think. It's like sitting in an armchair,
Yeah.
sort of
That is
nice oak furniture around you.
So I've finished my cheese. I've now cracked open the
Yeah.
I've cracked open the salami. That's really nice as well.
So a bit more malt sweetness in there as well from that sort of crystal malt, giving you a little bit of toffee,
gonna
but then
have
that
some of it.
herbalness runs through, and then and obviously I think the pairing for the salami was really around that herbal sort of
Because
flavours.
it's with rosemary, isn't
Yeah.
it? The salami we've picked from one of our stores locally producers. So that's really nice. I know what I'm doing on Sunday.
So I think that works really well, actually.
That's really, really lovely.
And I think you do
lovely.
tend to find that, particularly sort of fatty foods like sort of salami and cheese, I think actually the bitterness in beer helps to cut through that really well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think those sorts of foods it works really well with.
Really good, thank you. So, what new beers have Adnams got in the pipeline?
So what have we got? So we've got Old Ale coming out. So Old Ale is our second oldest beer, but it's a seasonal beer, so not sort of core, but it's a sort of mild that we've been doing since 1890.
Oh wow.
Not quite as long as everything else, but 1890 is relatively
Fairly
good.
mature,
It's very
isn't
good.
it?
But it comes out on cask every season, so we're bringing it out back now, so that will sort of be in pubs in the next week or so. And just to, I guess I don't know whether people know what cask beer is, but cask beer is essentially beer that still is live, it still has yeast, it's still doing a little bit of fermentation when it's in the cellar.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit different from everything else. Yeah, a little bit different. It's doing a little bit of extra work and a little bit. It's more of a partnership between breweries and pubs. It is that idea that pubs are actually involved in the process.
And I suppose that's why it's so important that a pub that is doing cask ales knows what they're doing.
Knows what they're doing and turns it over. It's really about freshness, really. And cask beer it lives or dies by that freshness. So that's what we really need to get through to people.
Brilliant. Okay, right. So I think that was the last Adnams beer, wasn't it,
Yes.
of the evening? We're now going to be trying, what's this one?
We're now going to try Three Counties.
Yep.
So Three Counties is from Moongazer, Nethergate and Mersey Brewery. So David at Moongazer sent me some notes on the beer. So this was a collaboration beer that they did specifically, I think, for East England Co-op.
Yeah.
So what they wanted to do was try and showcase, I think, the barley from East Anglia. And like I said, we do actually genuinely make some of the best quality malting barley anywhere in the world. So it's a variety particularly called Maris Otter. So it's a winter variety. Again, quite a historic variety. It's been grown for I don't know, about 16 years maybe now.
Oh,
60,
wow, okay.
which in barley varieties is quite a long time.
Yes.
But it gives a certain sort of flavour to the beer. They've also used some new English hops in here to try and showcase what some of those new English hops are trying to do.
And is this where you were talking a few minutes ago about that kind of the citrusy?
Yeah, they're trying to get a bit more citrus flavour.
More...
It will always be more subtle. We have to accept our hours of sunshine aren't quite as long.
No, yeah.
It's not quite as
bright.
bright.
It gives it that unique identity.
Yeah, and it does give it a bit of unique identity to what English hops can actually bring.
Yeah.
Right, so...
We're running out of room, aren't we?
Okay. So Dave has sent me the tasting notes on this as well.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you.
But I'll talk after we've tasted it. We'll talk through
wow,
it.
that smells so different.
Yeah, and I think part of that is that sort of shows a little bit of what our yeast does compared to what other people's yeast will do. So it does show quite a big
Yeah.
difference straight away.
And I'm sort of asking you, I know this isn't your beer, do you know whose yeast?
I don't know
whose
whose
you
yeast.
don't know?
Dave may have put that in the tasting notes. I can't remember.
No, but okay, that's good.
So again, it's quite a nice light colour. I think
Completely different though.
I think he describes it as a blonde ale or pale ale. He says.
Pale ale, yeah. But it's quite extraordinary how it is a completely different personality. Like the previous 5 that we've tasted, they are family. They're all very different, but there is they're family, aren't they?
Exactly. And that really comes from that yeast. It does come from that sort of thread running through it.
Yeah.
So I think Dave said the hops that they've used should be giving a little bit of apricot. Very subtle, but I think you can taste that sort of apricotiness coming through. It's
got some sort of that honey sweetness as well. You know, it's not the sort of pushy sweetness of sugar.
The pushy sweetness, I like that.
Yeah. But it is honey. It sits in a different place, doesn't it?
Yes.
Well, my dad was a beekeeper, so you know, it's he wasn't that keen on honey, hilariously. He did like the bees.
Yeah, but so I think that's a very nice beer.
Yeah, it is lovely. And this one, so this is to end off on top of the rhubarb popcorn. We're now going to have some smoked mackerel.
Yes, smoked mackerel.
So this will go beautifully, I think.
Yeah, I think that works. And again, I think the nice bitterness just helps with the oiliness of the fish, you know, and just makes it ready for the next bite.
The next one. I know. Unfortunately, though, we've run out of beers to drink, which is probably a good thing. I don't know what the guys would have come up with for us to pair the next things with. So thank you very much for that, Fergus. We really appreciate that. Yep. I hope everyone watching tonight, and if you're watching later on our YouTube channel, thank you very much for your attention. So that's it for tonight. I think almost all, with the exception of the Earl Grey, all of these beers are available in the East of England Co-op, and also all of the snacks that we've been pairing them with this evening. I hope you've enjoyed that. I've certainly learned a lot this evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you for hosting us, and thank you for sharing some of your wisdom and wise words.
It's been a pleasure, and it's been an experience for me as well.
Yeah. Thank you very much. So the next Your Co-op Live will be on the 3rd of November. And we will be looking at all sorts of ways that we can support you as we go into the winter months of what is likely to be a very difficult year for most of us. Looking at how we can help support and improve our mental health around diet improvement and sleep. So we've got some really great experts joining us again on the 3rd of November. So if you want to put that in your diary, we will look forward to seeing you then. Thank you very much, and thanks again to Adnams for hosting us this evening. Thank you. Cheers.